And electrifying freight is really broad, from electrifying equipment inside a facility to electrifying the vehicles to drones, robots, you name it. It's how can we electrify the movement of goods and services to mostly improve efficiency to the private operators. That's pretty much how they will do it. Only if it makes sense for them. They are not just gonna pay more for something that does less. That's not a good business practice, to spend more for less. But also because probably you have heard that we are in a climate crisis and we have a lot of pollution, we have impacts on communities. And even though I love freight, and that's what I do, freight is one of the largest contributors to those issues, to pollution, to safety impacts, so on and so forth. So we are trying as much as we can to mitigate those issues. And one of the options, is not the only option. And in fact, I will hope that we didn't have so much emphasis on the vehicles themselves and we expanded more into how to optimize operations. Because technically an electric car, an electric truck is a gun with a silencer. It's still gonna kill you if it hits you. But at least you don't get the fumes and you don't hear, so yeah, you can go easily. You don't hear the engine and the noise from a V10 or V8 powertrain. So the topic of today, electrifying California, really hot on it. If you get into this, California is the place to be. The states that are following the path of California are Washington State, Oregon, Illinois, Florida, and New York. And there are a few others that are catching up. But regarding policies, regarding efforts, regarding money invested in electrifying, and when I talk about electrifying, there's more to electrifying. It's anything that is zero emission and near zero emission technologies. So that includes fuel cell vehicles, that includes hybrid vehicles, and anything that somebody can come up with to power some of these movements. So in California, we have a really strong regulatory environment. We have an agency that is ARB, or the Air Resources Board, that have the ability to set kind of more stringent policies than the federal government. And people like that. Some people do not like that, but we have that ability. And that have allowed the system, at least in California, to develop and to improve a little bit more. It's kind of ironic that we are in the greenest state, but also we are in the state that has some of the area with the worst air quality in the nation. So I think that's the chicken and the egg. We're clean because we have been so bad at it. So in the last couple of years, there have been a number of regulations that have pretty much fostered the adoption of zero emission vehicles, putting money on the table for development, for demonstration, for not only the vehicles, but also the potential infrastructure that is needed to support those vehicles. So one of them, 2016, the previous Governor Brown, did an executive order where he mandated basically every agency in the state to work together to develop a sustainable freight plan. And as part of that effort, we were in it, we contributed, but there were mainly three main goals out of that plan. The first one was to improve freight efficiency, and efficiency in this case is measured by how much emissions are generated for every amount of money that is generated by the system. So we want to improve the system by 25% by 2030. The other one was kind of the first one that set some sort of goals in terms of how much equipment and vehicles we wanted on the road. So there was a goal of 100,000 vehicles and equipment. The truth is that we don't know how much equipment was already there before that. And this could be forklift, this could be stuff that is inside facilities and warehouses, and we truly don't have an inventory. But it was kind of the goal. And by that time, it was, well, I don't think we're gonna hit that goal. But I think we are hopefully on track because of the following policies that have been enacted after that. And there was a third goal that we are still figuring it out. And the rationale for the third goal is that anything that we do have to still improve the economic competitiveness of the state. So we want to improve, and we don't want to go broke by it, or we don't want to hamper companies establishing here and operating here because we are trying to do the other stuff. But that's still kind of vague. We don't know how to achieve that economic competitiveness by doing the rest. Then many things happened between 2016 and now. And one important thing is that that plan is just a plan. It's not a policy. There is no enforcement after or in that type of plan. So now agencies have been working on developing the policies to try to achieve some of those goals. And then they have been going after kind of more stringent goals and achieving more vehicles. So one that is really, really, really important, it was in 2020. I'm getting my years confused because of the pandemic. 2020 or 2021, it kind of blanks now, those 2 years. It was the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. So the ACT rule is technically, if you probably have heard maybe in the class or outside, in California, we have a SEV mandate for light duty vehicles. So a company have to get some credits every time they sell a vehicle that is zero emission, and then they compensate for the vehicles that are not zero emission. And that's how Tesla is making money and so on. So this kind of the freight counterpart. It's a sales mandate for OEMs on the truck side. And in addition to that, there was a fleet reporting requirement, and I guess it's really important because I have it twice in the slide. And then there was another executive order, 7920, that basically set lines on when we want all trucks that are sold in the state to be zero emission. So in general, it's going to be basically 2045, but there is kind of a tighter timeline for drayage trucks. And these are trucks that serve ports and move containers. So by 2045, we have all trucks that are sold to be zero emission. By 2035, all drayage trucks have to be zero emission. But remember, one thing is sales mandate, and the other thing is the fleet composition. So to be able to renew the entire fleet, we have to start selling only zero emission vehicles, but the existing trucks are going to take time until they die and they are replaced. And even with all the stringency that we are looking at, we don't think that we are going to get a full zero emission fleet only by 2060 or so. So it's still a long time that we're going to be having diesel trucks and gas trucks and other trucks that are not fully emission vehicles. But there are some federal mandates that are going to be regulating how much emissions even the diesel trucks are going to be emitting to the environment. So we're going to be penetrating SEVs, but at the same time, whatever the new vehicles from the other technologies are going to be cleaner, hopefully. Oh, they have to be cleaner because if not, they cannot be sold. There is kind of the people that is optimistic that say that by penetrating more and more of these SEV trucks, they are going to become cheaper, faster, and we're going to achieve cost parity with the diesel and the other technologies. So potentially the transition is going to accelerate at some point. Then ARB also in the last 2 years did the low NOx omnibus rule, and they work in the low NOx truck rule. That is kind of they are thinking that by having stringent rules on engines related to NOx, we're also going to be achieving some local benefits for local pollutants. And because this was a sales mandate, this is just mandating the OEMs to sell the trucks, we need to have fleets that are going to buy them. And right now, we are just having the OEMs offer the trucks, and then we have a bunch of incentive money for fleets to buy them, but there is no mandate for those fleets. ARB is in the last stages of approving and discussing what is called the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. That is technically a mandate for fleets to have a percentage of their fleet to be zero emission. So they are going to be forced to buy the trucks and start replacing their trucks a little by little. So before the ACT, we did analysis, and if you put everything that was already on the table, all the other policies, and we look into 2030, 2035, 2040, we were already looking into significant reductions of emissions, right? For some of these pollutant, NOx and PM, even before the ACT, we were hoping that if those policies got implemented and everybody complied, we're going to achieve 80%, 70% of emission reductions. One thing is something that is on the books, and the other thing is reality. And sometimes reality and books and expectations do not match. So then when we get the ACT, pretty much the ACT, this is what the ACT is going to be asking. In 2024, basically in 2 years, 5% of all the class 2B and 3, kind of the large pickups and delivery vans, the ones that are sold have to be zero emission. Class 4 to 8 that are not tractors, 9%, and class 7 and 8, the tractor have to be 5%. So why do I have these two graphs there? Throughout the development of the ACT, there were many workshops where ARB did and invited people and companies and trade organizations and so on. And through that process, they came out to something that looked like this. In the last 2 months, I guess, when they received the feedback, they changed that to this. So this was the final one. So it actually changed a lot from basically 15% for class 2B at 3 in 2030. It actually ended up to being 30%. So it was kind of a huge change in terms of what is going to be asked about the number of vehicles out there, the proportion of vehicles out there that are going to be sold have to be zero emission. So at some point, by 2035 and 2040 in general, 55%, 75%, and 40% of all these trucks have to be zero emission. Hopefully we get there, but there are many things that can go against it or that can favor a faster adoption of these vehicles. So if you now add the ACT in the two places that we're kind of lagging between the previous graph was CO2 and SOx, now we see that we can achieve more reductions in terms of what those newer vehicles and cleaner vehicles are going to be helping out into the system. Again, we're talking about 20, 30 years, many things can happen, but these are kind of the projections that we have estimated. I talk about there are existing a number of incentive programs out there that provide different pots of money for companies to buy vehicles. I'm going to touch on some of the numbers in a bit, but just to give you an idea, at Class 8, a semi-truck, the one you see on the road, diesel trucks new are about $150,000. The same truck, if you look at that truck to be electric today, is going to be around $400K. So there's a big gap in terms of the price of the diesel and the price of the electric. And it's not only that the price is different, is that the technology, the electric technology, because of the battery weight, it have enough range to be kind of a match one-to-one to the diesel truck. A diesel truck can run 800 miles with a loaded tank. And on average, when they go to fuel, it will take about 40 minutes between the queuing and the time at the pump. So it takes about 40 minutes for a diesel truck to get 800 miles of range. And you can find basically diesel anywhere. The electric, then we get the issue that you don't have enough range, or it's limited range. And today, the ones that are going to be commercialized at the end of this year and next year, you have Daimler coming with the e-Cascadia, you have Volvo with the VNR, and they are also releasing a few more. And then you have XOS and a couple of other companies coming in with those models. We are expecting only about 250, maximum 300 miles of range. And depending on the technology and how much power you can get and electricity you can get into those trucks, it can range to kind of recharge those vehicles between 2 hours up all the way to 6 hours, 8 hours. It will depend on how fast you can charge those vehicles. And we are still looking into a limited number of locations where they can do it. In fact, when I say limited, is 1 or 2. Right now in California, there is no single public charging facility for trucks. So the only ones are kind of fleets that have done demonstration projects and have actually built inside the facilities some charging capabilities for trucks. They're using money from the California Energy Commission and a few other grants and private money. There is a company that actually broke ground in Southern California and is going to start at least with 4 different locations for charging. So it's going to provide charging to vehicles that to do around probably 400, 500 miles from the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. So with that amount of charging and the locations, they think they can serve a number of trucks to do that. So the differential between the 150K and the 400K, between the diesel and the electric, have to come from somewhere else. Either it can be an investment from the company that does it, because electric trucks do provide some benefits in terms of reduced maintenance and reduced operational costs and whatever other costs you discuss under the TCO for light duty. We get kind of similar analogies to the truck side. We have learned a little bit from buses, because they are heavy duty and they're basically almost a truck. And now we have a few years of large bus fleets to be electrified around the world. So we are learning a little bit from the buses. Now, the buses have fixed routes. They don't deviate. It's more control. So you can plan exactly how much range you need. When you're a trucker, someday you may get a load from Davis to Sacramento, Davis to the Bay Area, Davis to Modesto. Another day you can get a load that is from Davis to Miami. And definitely you cannot go from Davis to Miami using an electric truck, because you don't have anywhere to charge it along the way. So for the remaining, that is not kind of the private company, there are some of these pots of money, and some of those goes as incentive to buy the vehicles. Some of the others are kind of to pay if you need to do retrofits to your facility to put charging. And the charging can be something as easy as going to a company that manufactures dispensers and chargers, like what you do for cars, and plug it into your grid at the facility. In other cases, depending on the need, you will have to work with the utilities to get new lines, transformers, and many other things that have to go into the facility. Today, nobody knows how much exactly that costs. When you talk to different companies and different agencies, pretty much they tell you right now is case by case, because they're so limited that they don't have kind of an average of how much it costs. But if you want to put a number, let's say at least it's going to be 50K per truck to install the charger for a truck at a facility. One of the most, I wouldn't say most common, but the one that you will hear a lot about kind of incentive for trucks in California is the HVIP that started for hybrid, but now it extends for fuel cells and many other technologies. And for trucks, you can get a purchase incentive between $6,000 and $150,000. And it depends on the cost and the differential price of the vehicle. And there are other states that have similar incentive program like this. Then we have another type of source of incentive that come from low carbon fuel standards, or the LCFS, that is trying to clean the energy out there. But for practice and to simplify the discussion, through the LCFS, a fleet or a company can get kind of a reduced cost of the kilowatt hour or the electricity needed to run the vehicles. And there are agencies such as ARB that claim that depending on the structure of the LCFS, you can actually pay nothing for the electricity. But there are many caveats and things that go into that analysis. So that's kind of an overview of some policies and some of the incentives. 2 years ago, well, 3 years now, we did a survey to fleets to see what were the most important aspects when they were choosing a vehicle. So you get kind of two sets. From here up is stuff related to cost. And as you can see, purchase price, maintenance are really important for fleets. So if price is really important and you're telling them to buy something really, really pricey, then there's going to be a lot of opposition. But then beside cost, there are things that they do need, such as vehicle reliability. Basically, diesel trucks, everybody knows them, everybody can fix them, you know how they perform. Electric trucks, fuel cell trucks, and some of these new technologies are just new. We don't know what the reliability is. We don't know when they are going to break down. And if they break down in the middle of the road, are there going to be any shops to actually fix it? So that's pretty important. Driving range, as I mentioned, is important. How long it takes to charge and the availability of those charging facilities. And then you get some of the environmental considerations and brand image. And then when we asked them 3 years ago for the next purchase, what are the kind of the technology that you are going to be considering? And as if you see here, diesel is pretty much, that's the one they are mostly considering. Now, if you want to see the glass half full, we see that there are about 40% of the fleet that are also maybe considering the other technologies. So it's not kind of a lost battle. We just need to figure out how to make those sexy for the companies. So based on this, we have done research trying to basically analyze, are these vehicles technologically feasible? And also, are these vehicles economically feasible for companies? And what we found is that it actually depends on what they are going to be doing. And in freight, even though people do not like that word, but in freight, we have something called vocations, the type of activity that the truck is going to be doing. For example, are you going to be moving ag products? Are you going to be moving containers? Are you going to be moving logs? Are you going to be moving waste? So depending on that, we call that different vocations. But in general, we have kind of long haul trucking, short haul trucking, last mile trucking. And last miles, those trucks that are coming from sort of warehouse or distribution center that go into stores, malls, and residential areas, and e-commerce. And today, I will say the technology can do last mile pretty much, and I'll show you results. It can do a lot of the short haul, because if range is one of the constraints in short haul, the range is not as important as it is for long haul. That implies really long hauls. But then when we get into long haul, we have many issues today. We have the issue of a range. We're comparing 800 miles, or basically infinite range of a diesel truck, because you can fuel really fast anywhere. So that's not an issue. And then if you want to get higher range on an electric truck, you have to put more batteries on it. But the batteries are really heavy. So the more batteries you put to get more range, the less cargo you can actually carry. So you're basically moving a really heavy truck, and that cargo that is the battery is not paying you to be moved. So you have less space, less capacity to actually move stuff that is going to pay you. So there's kind of a limit in the US for how much a vehicle can weigh. Anything else, that's why truckers would like to reduce the actual weight of the vehicle itself so they can carry more and make more money. So I'm going to concentrate on last mile and short haul. For long haul, I don't have the solution. People say the solution for long haul is going to be either we find a way to split trips and do more of a rally points. So we divide long haul into short hauls, and that will be kind of a different operational pattern into the entire freight system. Some people say the answer is fuel cell trucks, that they don't have that limitation on range. And the other one could be that batteries, chemistry, and composition improve so much that we can get more power for less weight. We have better density on those batteries. But I recently finished a project over I-5, working with all the MPOs in the San Joaquin Valley. We wanted to test electric trucks or fuel cell trucks all the way from Bakersfield to kind of Tracy over I-5. there were no trucks out there that were able to do that distance. That was about 187 miles, and they had to come back. So there was no trucks out there. So yeah, today and in this thing, we have to actually contextualize when we say today we don't have a solution for long haul trucking. Even though, as you saw, from 2024, a lot of the long haul trucks also have to be zero emission. So that's kind of where we have a mismatch between what we need to do and where the technology is today. And there is a lot of pain points for companies that will have to buy those trucks. So what is the alternative? Well, we may need to concentrate, and the policies have been concentrated on really large fleets, and large fleets are so large that they may be able to even buy the vehicles and only use them for the shorter distances. But we are not going to be reaping up the benefits of all the mileage that could be electrified and made zero emission, because we don't have those vehicles out there to do so. There is also a mismatch between the penetration of the vehicles and how fast we can accommodate the infrastructure to charge those vehicles. So let's look into the one that we are really confident that we are already there. And one of them is last mile. So last mile, there are two cases, kind of the B2B, business to business, companies that are delivering to their own stores from their warehouses, or suppliers that are delivering to stores, and then B2C, from businesses to consumers, mainly e-commerce or retail companies that are doing last mile deliveries, again, e-commerce or residential deliveries. You have two different segments. One is more parcel type, a bunch of people, small packages. The other one is a small number of retail stores or locations, but larger cargo. But still, those are a little bit short haul. There's some sort of a nearby facility that is sending out those vehicles to those customers or those delivery points. So what did we do for a few years ago? We used data from a database. I don't know if you have already discussed Fleet DNA, but if you are looking into kind of data to analyze trucks, and they also have light duty vehicle data. So Fleet DNA from NRail, they have a repository of kind of aggregated GPS data of vehicles. So we went in and we downloaded the data for trucks. They have many different types of trucks, but we were concentrating on parcel deliveries, and then we use a TCO, a total cost of ownership tool called A-Fleet to do analysis. And then we basically updated the parameters on A-Fleet based on the empirical analysis we were doing on the data. So we got about 4,700 days of driving data from about almost 500 medium and heavy duty trucks, over 18 vocation types, and vocations include beverage delivery, warehouse, parcel, linen, grocery, food, local, and others. They don't tell you where the data is collected from. They just tell you that the data is coming from these locations that you see on those dots. I think in the last couple of years, they have added more data, but I have not gone back and look into it. But we look into parcel because that was the one that had the most data, and also we were looking into last mile deliveries, and parcel is last mile deliveries. So as you can see, for parcel delivery, there are basically classes 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. So companies use a wide range of vehicles, from a small delivery vehicles to large trucks to do last mile deliveries. And it's just because it depends on the company that is doing so. You may see UPS with a kind of a Ford van or a Mercedes Sprinter van, all the way to a box truck or even a semi truck. So they use different type of trucks over there. And in the data, because they have collected data from different trials, at least at that point, they also had kind of some hybrid trucks in there as well, but no electrics. I think right now they have some electric data in it. When we analyze the driving distance from the different vocations, this is basically a histogram of how far those vehicles travel in a day. And without going into the details, you can see that the distributions are different. So different vocations will have a different driving pattern. Even within just last mile, we have a variability. Now imagine what you get in the short haul, what you get in the long haul. So we are concentrating in the parcel delivery. And as you can see, most of the distances are short, are almost less than 100 miles. Local deliveries can go all the way to 150, warehouse delivery 200, food delivery are even shorter. So if we need to prioritize vocations, we can look at this type of data and say, hey, we cannot make all local delivery companies to get these trucks that can only do 100 miles. But we may find low-hanging fruits in other vocations. The problem is that there is not that much data out there that is available for this. And in fact, collecting data in freight is really difficult. So this is kind of the averages, the median, and the mean of the average daily distance. And as you can see, parcel is about 45 miles per day that those trucks are running. And if you look at a city and you look at a UPS or a Amazon van, right? How many stops do you think an Amazon van is doing in a day? A delivery van? Oh, the hundreds could be 100 or 900. Can you give me? That's too much. So they are doing between 100 and 200 stops per day in a tour. And they are delivering about 300 packages every time they do a tour, and they spend about 8 hours doing so. So they depart around 10 a.m. and they come back about 5 or 6 to the depot. Most of that distance is being between where the depot is and where the core of the customers are. So they have to do that distance twice. When they arrive to the core of the customers, and then they finish, and then they go back. So out of the 100% of the distance that they're traveling today, those two, the first and the last leg of that trip, is going to be about 50 to 60% of all the distance. The other 40% is to deliver to the other 150 points. So the interdistance customer is pretty short. Then we also analyze kind of PIDs versus stops by different vocations, and we identify that there were natural clusters on data. We identify distance versus maximum speed, and then you can pretty much see locations in which, or vocations that you know that are doing a lot of stops and goes inside kind of the city, kind of going into the local streets. And then you have vocations that are mainly traveling along the highways, and then they can travel faster. And then for some locations or some vocations, investing a lot on regenerative braking and some of these technologies make sense. For others, it makes sense more on putting aerodynamics into the trucks. Because if you're driving really slow, no aerodynamics is going to do anything. If you are never stopping and going, then regenerative braking is not doing anything. So we have to actually find the matching between how the vehicle is going to be used and the technologies. But this is kind of an important graph. So this is the cumulative distribution of the distances traveled per day by these different vocations. And for most of them, or at least parcel, we know that about 95% of all those routes in our sample were traveling less than 100 miles. The Amazon Sprinter, or the Mercedes-Benz Sprinter, the Ford, the other vehicles that are out there that are coming into the market can do about 120, 150 miles range, and they don't have any issues on the weight. This is kind of not heavy volumes. So today we can do all last mile with zero emission vehicles. We don't have enough production or enough capacity to manufacture them. There's still a differential price between a regular diesel delivery van and electric, but we're only talking about 20, 25%, 30% difference. It's not like 150K to 400K on the long haul trucks. So we need to push more for last mile to be electrified. That's why, I don't know if you have been aware, but there have been this kind of discussion in the media because the USPS made a contract last year for the new round of USPS Postal Service vehicles, and they didn't go electric. even though they could have gone electric. So we did more analysis, and we estimated TCOs for different delivery vehicles. And we created a bunch of scenarios that included, if we included incentives on the electricity, incentive on purchase, and incentive both in electricity and purchase. So we have kind of three types of, or three sets of three types of scenarios. And then what we have kind of driving the scenarios is how much we think is the efficiency of an electric vehicle compared to the gasoline or diesel counterpart in terms of, let's say, miles per gallon equivalents. Do we think an electric vehicle or electric truck can give you 2.5 more efficient or be more efficient than a regular one, all the way to 5.7? So this is a big range and uncertainty. We don't know exactly what those efficiencies are going to be. Then we also found that even within the data, and we got two companies that had a lot of trucks in the sample that were doing parcel vocation, and we identified that they had a different composition of the fleet. For instance, this company did not use any class 6. And the second company used only classes 4 and 6. And the amount of distance that was traveled within those vehicles is different. It can be because they are serving different markets. It could be because they are more strategically located within the urban areas to travel less. But it's really important, and you probably discussed this when looking in the TCO. But if one of the benefits that we get out of electric vehicles on the pocket is how much you're saving in terms of maintenance and fuel cost, those two are variable costs related to how much you drive them. And if that's kind of the source of the benefit to you to compensate for the extra investment, you have to drive them a lot to basically materialize those benefits. But if you don't drive them too much, then you're not saving as much as you need to recover the initial investment cost of the vehicles. And that's pretty important. So we did analysis, and we actually did a little bit of the cost to be on the high side just to see what happened. And we had different values of incentives for hybrid electrics and electrics. And then we had different maintenance costs and the fuel economies. So this is kind of a comparison of the TCO for the different vehicles, the vehicle technologies for parcel deliveries. And I'll get into the other ones, but this is pretty much these two here are the EV and the EV plus the California incentive. And with the California incentive, even with the high prices, we can basically beat most of the other technologies. So for last mile, we're already in a technical capability to do what they need to do. And we are already, with the incentive and all the things that are going on in the system, we are financially viable to do so. Now, there are not that many out there. They're just coming into market. And companies have actually invested in new startups to be able to get more of these vehicles. For example, Amazon actually, Ford also invested heavily in Rivian. And they have committed to buy a lot of the delivery vans that are coming from this company. And there will be other companies also that are going to be generating some of these vehicles. So then we did another type of analysis. We did, okay, so we know we need to incentivize them. But we are giving a lot of money to incentivize these vehicles. Are we actually making that money worth a lot in terms of the benefit to the system? Can we quantify the benefit of having an electric truck versus a diesel truck, and then see if whatever we're getting in terms of benefit is more or less to whatever we are putting in to buy and get those things? So we actually did that, and we got basically two different types of cost. So we divided the cost of the externality by the cost of incentive, and we did kind of the reverse, the cost of abatement, the dollars of incentive for the dollars of externality. And in some cases, we get, if you look at the This is the cost of abatement. So it will be how much incentive we are giving for every dollar of externality. In some cases, we're giving up to almost $4 of incentive for every dollar we save on externality. So we're not being as efficient with the money. So there's a caveat to this. When we look into abatement, when we look into ROI, we need to look at that when we have the system more kind of in a stable state, in a steady state, when things are going on for a few years and you can have kind of the costs where they are. Right now, because we are just breaking the inertia and having the companies kind of overcome some of the limitations of the technology, we have to invest more on it. That's why it may not seem as efficient today that we're putting too much for everything that we get back. But I will say it's because we are breaking that inertia, and that inertia is costly. And we have to do it. We did more sensitivity analysis to see what are the parameters on the TCO that impacted more. Price usually comes top, and that's where we have a lot of uncertainty. The models are only coming out, so we don't know how much they are going to cost. The other aspect that is really important for companies is the payback period. And we didn't find robust results on our payback periods. They were really dependent on the inputs and the empirical data that we got from the companies. So you can see here, we had cases in which a company will take 94 years to recover the money for one vehicle. Now, that's kind of on the more pessimistic side, without any incentive, without not too much efficiency on the vehicle. When we look into where we think we are somewhere here. Now we are talking between kind of 3 years and let's say 10 years. And again, those numbers are important depending on the vocation. If you're looking into a large company doing long haul, they are looking for payback periods on their investments to be about between 3 and 4 years. Because they put a lot of miles on those trucks and they need to get those trucks out of their service and then renew them really fast. When we're looking into last mile, companies may use those vehicles up to 10 years. So that's also important, what type of vocation you are looking at. But there's a lot of variability in these numbers. And there are many things that affect that payback period. How much they are driven per year, what is the actual cost, what is the level of incentive. Any questions? So I'll get into the short. Go ahead.
So we were talking about earlier about how but what do you think? Obviously, you said that's more on the pessimistic side, but is there? And then you said that you need to be more smarter in incentives to make that work, have a realistic payback period. Is there anything else that you think could make that payback period more realistic? And what do you think is a reasonable payback period?
Well, I don't think the question is what is realistic. What I think is realistic is what companies want. I mean, they need to have 3 or 4 years payback periods, only for the long hauls. For the medium and last mile, it can be 7 years or so. ARB, in most of the analysis that they do, whenever they do TCO or net present value of the vehicles, they are assuming about, I think it's about 7 years on the trucks. And then they see if there's a positive or negative flow on those vehicles. But if you look to a company, they want to make money or they want to recover the investment in about 3 or 4 years. That's how far they are willing to risk that money. Granted, a long haul can do 100, 120,000 miles per year, 150,000 miles per year. So at the end of year 3 or 4, they're already at the 500,000 mark. A five-year delivery van is going to be on 120,000 miles. 5 year of light duty vehicle, it could be on the average 60,000 miles. And anything that you need to do on a large truck is more expensive. And this already includes that they are changing wheels way faster than 3 or 4 set of wheels per year. So we need to acknowledge that it's not only the TCO, it's not only that we get a positive TCO or a negative TCO, because a company is looking at the TCO, but also at other factors. One of them to be the payback. You can have a positive TCO, but it takes 20 years to get it. Okay, so the other vocation that I mentioned that I think we are ready, or getting ready, is one of the sub-vocations within short haul, and that's drayage. And I'll explain a little bit of the movements within drayage. If I will say last mile, we are already 95% ready. Drayage, I will say we're between 75 and 80% ready. Long haul, we're only at 20, 30%. Short haul, drayage is important for a few things. One is that it's a segment that we know a lot about. It's a segment that, at least in California, is affecting a lot of people. So we have the largest ports in California to be the San Pedro Bay ports, Los Angeles and Long Beach. We have a lot of movement out of those ports, and there are many communities affected by those movements. And we have the worst air basin in terms of attainment for ozone and other things in that area. So we can find a use case in which we can now penetrate and go in full force to clean that movements and reduce the externality that are associated to those movements. So what we did in this analysis, or I'm gonna get there in a little bit. So again, the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, about 30% of all the imported goods in the US, and 60% of the tonnage that comes through the West Coast. So they are really important. But there is a lot of chronic air quality. And since 2012, ARB, EPA, the South Coast Air Quality District Management District have invested tons of money on doing pilot tests. So they have done 7 or 8 demonstration projects. There have been many casualties in terms of startups along the way that got money but were not profitable and went bankrupt. And then we have had a few successes on projects. There was a recent project called the Volvo Lights. That was almost a $90 million project that tried SEBs and other technologies in the corridor between the ports and San Bernardino to improve and implement some of those things. The ports are also kind of interesting because they have the ability to set their own rules in a sense. So we have federal mandates, we have ARB, and now the ports can also do stuff in addition to that. So that's kind of another advantage of this specific use case. So they have done a few of the cleaner action plans in the last 20 years. The most recent one was in 2017. And basically, one of the things that came out of the 2017 cap is that by 2035, all vehicles accessing the ports have to be zero emissions. So remember I told you there is the governor's executive order. This is kind of how you actually implement it, because they can actually block entrance to the gate to vehicles that are not zero emission, as opposed to having to invest in enforcement out there on police and patrol to taking out vehicles. Now they can actually do it really easily. In that cap, they also approved something called the Clean Truck Fund Rate. That is basically a fee that they are going to start charging to containers that are transported by vehicles that are not zero emission vehicles. And then they are going to be using that money to provide grants to companies to buy vehicles or to many other things. And what we did is we found an alternative type of incentive program using the CTFR to incentivize the purchase. So as I'll mention is, we're going to be charging money to the containers that are not coming or moved in or using SEPs. And then we're giving money to the fleets that are moving the containers with SEPs. The main difference is that the fee is charged to the owners of the cargo, not the truckers or the drayage companies, but the incentive is going to the truckers. So we are basically translating some of the benefits from one, or the cost of one, and benefiting the other ones. In terms of efficiency, for this system that can actually determine if a SEB is ready for them is affected by how long they travel. Now we are talking about the range. It's affected by how heavy the load is. It's affected by how many trips they need to do in a day or in a week, and if they have time to recharge. Truck turn times. Sometimes they waste a lot of money at the gates or at the ports, and that takes about kind of the physical time for them to operate. And I mentioned that there are already incentives out there to buy them, but we wanted to kind of explore this new other type of incentive to basically overcome some of these challenges. For example, even if companies get some money, they may not have the additional capacity to put their extra money that is needed to compensate for the vehicle costs. If we are only relying on the vouchers, the purchase vouchers, we're talking about between $2 and $5 billion that will be needed to electrify the drayage trucks. And we only have about $5 billion to electrify the freight fleet in California. So either we use all of that just for the ports, that is going to be 17,000 vehicles, or we find ways to electrify the 300,000 trucks that we need to electrify. So we came out with, with the incentive that I mentioned, and we think that that will not only help bridge the gap, but also drive a little bit of the efficiency, because if you're getting money every time you move a container with a clean vehicle, you will try to put them more at work. And then we are cleaning more and more some of those miles.
Going back, you're saying that there would be fees applied to trucks that work for the emissions requirements. Do you have any idea of like those fees, like the percentage of how much, how much money are we talking about for a fee for a vehicle that doesn't meet the emission requirement? Like, is there a percentage number there?
Okay, so first they need to meet the emission requirements. If not, they cannot operate. But I think you're referring to they are not zero emissions. What they discussed in the policy or when they were doing this plan, and it actually took 2 years to implement it, and they only started to implement the fee, I think 1 month ago. It's going to be about, I forget the numbers, there's less than $15 per TEU per 20 equivalent for a small container. So for a 40-feet container, we're talking about $30. Yeah, we're talking about billions of dollars. Remember, we have about 17,000 trucks that are serving the ports. And if you assume that the cost of a one drayage truck is $150, okay, and if you assume that you can get them at $250 or $350, and you need to compensate that, we're talking between $2 billion and almost $5 billion. Those $10 are not enough to cover that amount of money.
My question is like, in terms of the fee going to the sender, how does the company internalize that cost? Do they basically, like, if they have a vehicle, do they kind of charge the same rates as another company which doesn't, and then they kind of basically get a pocket difference?
Yeah. Right now, if you have an electric truck or you have a diesel truck, you're charging for the same amount of money to move the same container the same distance. So there is no differentiation today in terms of that you can charge more if your truck is cleaner.
Well, it's not so much that they would charge more, but basically because the fee is going to the sender, like how does that work in terms of, like, does the sender know, like, oh, okay, so I have a contract with this company and half of their trucks are ZEB and half of them are not, and then like, do they know when they're going to get that $10 fee or whatever it is, when they're not going to?
So the ports know for every container who's the owner, and the ports know for every container which truck drove them or transported them. Every year, companies have to register or renew their registration into what is called the truck registry at the ports. So they get all the information about every single truck that can come in. So it's easy to map the owner of the cargo and the truck that transported that, I think they just get a bill at some point. They don't know. When they start incorporating some of this stringent that I'll talk about, I guess companies will start looking more for the fleets that are greener, that have more sets to avoid to pay that. And maybe then they will be able to hike the prices a little bit, or the fees. But there's so many of them that I don't think they're going to be able to do so. And remember, a company is paying about $150 and $200 per container to move it. So $10, $30, I mean, it can be 10, 20% of an increase in the fee. But when you see that the value of the goods inside the container is 100K, 50K, 10 extra bucks, 20 bucks is nothing. So that's why we're charging to the owner of the cargo, not the vehicle operating or the company operating the vehicle. There are a few other fees that are already charged to companies that are operating at the ports. So a few years ago, considering that there was a lot of congestion out of the ports, they implemented something called the Pier Pass. That is basically, they wanted to operate kind of in the off hours. So if you move your movements to the off hours, you didn't have to pay that Pier Pass fee. If you wanted to continue driving and picking up and dropping containers within kind of the peak of the day, you had to pay that Pier Pass fee. So they call it the kind of the congestion fee. There were kind of 2 cycles where they hiked the price. At some point now, they are charging that congestion fee to everyone. And if you look at the Trucking Harbor Association, that is kind of the association of truckers on this segment, in the last few weeks, they have been putting out a bunch of news about, hey, they are killing us with all these fees. But technically, these fees are really small. I mean, if you're charging the trucker, those are high fees, because the Pier Pass fee is already about 50-something bucks. But again, the Pier Pass fee is charged to the owner of the cargo, the VCO. So speed up. So what we wanted to do here is, okay, can we charge the fee, and then can we then pay the fee or pay something to the companies that are driving the vehicles that are zero emission? And the idea is that, can we use the money to basically fully compensate the additional cost for a company that instead of buying the diesel is going to buy an electric in terms of a lease? So we gathered data from different sources, we characterized operation for fleets, and then we created a model to estimate how much you charge and how much you give out. So this is some data about where we are in terms of the technology. So a fully loaded, an electric truck today or 2 years ago will have been able to do about 60 miles with a fully loaded container. That's the range. Empty, that goes up to about 85 miles, and with no container, only the bobtail, about 100 miles with about 240 battery capacity. The new vehicles that are coming in are basically, we think we are going to be doing about 170 miles top maximum with a full load. I mean, carrying a full load container. 265 empty, and about 300 miles with only the bobtail. But this is kind of the actual mileage is going to be between these two numbers. Because there are some cases in which they travel fully loaded. There are cases in which they're carrying an empty container, and there are cases in which they're picking up container from one place to the next, and then they're only traveling with the bobtail. And these are kind of efficiencies, kilowatts hour per mile. I think in the next 10 years, we're pretty much going to 4 to 3 for a loaded container. I don't think we're going to be, hopefully we improve more than that. But this is what we use for for this analysis. So basically, for container movements, for port movements, they are categorized in these 6 categories. What we call near dock movements, that is the movement from the port to something really nearby. Then we have what's called local near and local away. And that's pretty much when they go to an intermodal facility that is further away from the port. Then we get regional, also near and far, and then long distance. There are containers that are taken from the ports and driven really far away. And this is on average one-way trip in terms of miles of those movements. So near dock is about 2 miles. So it's just some facility nearby the terminal. Local, about 5 miles, local away about 20, regional 40, regional away about 75. And then we have about 300 miles on average for the long distance. So what we did is we analyzed how many containers they could move in a day, operating hours, time at the gates, time at the terminal, time at the destination. And then we identify, based on some of those movements, how many, what is kind of the throughput, how much you can use a vehicle. And that's what we use for the rest of the analysis. For example, if, just to give you an idea, in a day, if everything goes well and you're only doing near dock trucks, you will be able to use that truck to do about 2.5 movements on average. And, or sorry, this is the time it takes about to do that one. What is the, yeah. So you'll be able to, sorry, this is the time you'll be able to do 3.92 movements in one day. If you are doing all the way to regional away, the maximum you're gonna be doing is 1.3. And then we know, because of there are statistics given by the ports, we know on average, the proportion of all the containers that are moving in these different segments. So for the total, we can always kind of spread them out to near dock, local near, local away, regional, and long distance. And then we know for a fixed, a given fleet, we know what will be kind of the productivity of that fleet in terms of container movements. The other question that we had is, well, things can change, and we don't know if the vehicles are going to be more efficient or not, and we don't know how many containers have to be moved. So we did projections, and we constructed a bunch of scenarios about the number of containers that will have to be transported. And then we, based on the analysis that we did, then we said that type of fleet that we needed and the proportion of the fleet that we needed to do so. And we considered 3 types of vehicle technologies: zero emission, basically electric; near zero emission, basically low NOx gases; and other are the diesel trucks. So gray is diesel, blue is gas, low NOx, and orange is pretty much electric. And as you can see, there's quite a variability in terms of the number of trucks that are going to be needed for all the containers and the penetration of the different technologies. Then we did an optimization model where we wanted to find our outcome variables are how much do you charge per container to the companies that are not doing zero emission, and how much you give out to the ones as an incentive. And remember, we have way more diesel at the beginning and just a few of zero emissions. So we don't need to charge as much to the diesel trucks to give a high incentive to the zero emission vehicles. And then we did basically two set of analysis. One is if we open the gates and we continuously give out these incentives, or we cap it into what we call revenue neutral, that a company will only be able to get a total amount of incentive that compensates to the extra cost. They are not going to be making any money extra out of this incentive. So we tested different scenarios for the mid price of the battery or the vehicle, low price of the vehicle, and depending on the median, mean, and maximum the values, this is what we were getting in terms of how much you charge per TEU. So remember, the policy is telling you that the charge is going to be between 10 and 15 per TEU. We are finding that the value at least in this case, for a low price scenario, was between around 10 to almost 60. So it could be about 6 times more than what they are doing. But we think that in the great scheme of things, if this charged to the VCOs, this is nothing, still nothing compared to the value of the cargo. So we assume that we're going to be charging this flat for every container movement to the VCO, and this is how much we were going to give out to the company per movement. So we start with a high incentive, almost $100, $90 per container as an incentive, not container, per TEU. And then it gradually goes down as things get cheaper, because the trucks are going to be getting cheaper as we move forward. Then we did another scenario in which we were basically just revenue neutral. And in 2022, for example, we'll start giving out about $90 per container. By 2035, that amount of incentive only goes between 5 and 23. And somebody can argue that at that time we can stop giving incentive because they are all required to get zero emission. If not, they cannot operate. And this is pretty much what the cost of the fee will be. Again, between 20 and 75, more or less, per container. And it will be how fast you can go in terms of if you give out a lot at the end, or you give it, sorry, you still give a lot at the end, or you start giving a little bit less at the end. And then we did a bunch of other scenarios in terms of only for the 5 years, or we continue to give so, low price, mid container demand, low penetration of near zero emission, high penetration of sets, because we have a bunch of different scenarios. Yeah.
What do you use to run all the scenarios? Like go back slides, see how
These ones?
and then strings the next one. So I was wondering what is used to run all the scenarios for all this like program.
Basically was, I would say, mostly Excel.
Excel.
Yeah. I mean, you can do any other program, but the level of complexity for here, Excel is fine. But R will be better, GAMS will be better. But if you can do it simpler, it's fine. That's my lemma. The problem is that I do a lot of things manually, as opposed to Alan that automates the things. So every time I make a mistake, I have to backtrack that mistake through a bunch of pages. But technically, this is what the optimization was. So the objective scenario, or the objective function here, is to minimize the amount of reward that was needed. Then we have a bunch of balance constraints in terms of how many vehicles are coming in from near zero emission and zero emission. And these are based on the scenarios of the fleet penetration and how fast the other vehicles are dying. So we are replacing vehicles. But in some cases, we need to add more vehicles than just replacing, because we have more containers to be moved. Then we have kind of how much we are charging and how much we're giving out. This is just basically balancing the amount of money. So nobody's making money out of it. It's just paying for what it is. Then basically this constraint over here are telling you that you can never give more money than what you have, what you collected. And we also didn't want IABC control in some of these cases that I'm never increasing anything. So I'm never increasing either the fee or the incentive. It's always kind of a decay. So I'm constraining for those values there. And then my decision variable is the level of the fee for every year and the level of incentive for every year. So it will be the CTFR subscript T. So how much we charge every year, and IRRT is how much I give out per TU every year. And I make them basically ready. Yeah, so pretty much in Excel. So at the end, just one scenario. I don't remember which one, but this is basically the penetration. So you have the blue in this case, in the zero emission trucks, you have this space over here are near zero emission, and this over here is the diesel. There's one thing that I didn't mention to explain a little bit how the fee is working. I told you that vehicles that are not zero emission are going to be paying that fee. The ports are allowing near zero emission vehicles, basically low NOx vehicles, to be exempt from that fee. But that exemption is going to end in 2030. So by in 2030, the only trucks that are going to be exempt from that fee are the truly zero emission vehicles. These near zero emission vehicles can operate still after that, but are going to be paying that fee. At the end of 2030, even though I didn't control that it actually hit, but in 2030, the only vehicles that could access the facilities are going to be zero emission or near zero emission vehicles. So that's pretty important. Between 2022 and 2030, we're going to have a mix of these three types of vehicles that it can be registered every year. The blue ones and these kind of dark orange are kind of the near zero, are going to be exempt from the fee until 2030. After 2030, no diesel vehicles could not be registered. So that small triangle there in theory shouldn't exist, because in theory no more diesel vehicles are going to be allowed into the facilities. After 2030, even the near zero are going to start paying the fee. But if we look at the projections on the emission reduction based on this penetration scenario, we see that by 2030, 2035, we're already reaching, in terms of NOx and SOx, quite high levels of emission reductions compared to the baseline. And the baseline is already green. Still, CO2 and PM, at some point, we're going to be reaching between the 50 and the 75%, 80% reduction. So we need to find the best way to promote and have companies access some of the vehicles. We need to pay attention of the vocations and the actual needs of those vehicles. I think it's going to be a hard sell for many type of vocations with the current technologies. We're going to be fighting too much of the current, and it's going to be too painful. Maybe we need to invest on finding the vocations that are easier to do. So, and agencies are doing that. But also, as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think technology-based strategies are the only approach. We need to find many other ways. We need to get better at routing. We need to get better at information management. We need to get better at coordinating among companies, matching, improving efficiencies. You have to go all the way from supply to demand. We have to work with the owners of the cargo, so they also think about where that cargo is going to be, where it's going to be stored. And again, all of these, if you're implementing any type of incentive, are we meant to bridge the entire price gap or only a proportion? There are analysis that it should be done in terms of sensitivity. Maybe we don't need to give all the money. We only need to subsidize up to 50% of the extra cost, or 60%, and people will move into it. Maybe we have to avoid people overusing incentives or taking advantage of incentive programs. And overall, we don't have enough money to incentivize everyone. Who's going to get incentives? The other question that I'm not talking in today, but it's really important for freight, and I'm not up to date on what's going on with the light duty sector, but most of the incentives that we have today are for the first buyer. And the first buyer is going to get a good reduction on the cost, but trucks may get different lives. And the second life, you get it in a putter owner, a putter fleet, and now you get a truck that is a new technology that is already at some phase that may need a new battery and so on. So we haven't actually touched too much on what's going to happen on those second and third lives of these vehicles. I think in the light duty, we now have hybrids to be in the third generation or second and third. But I don't know about electric, probably just getting into the end of the first cycle. And I don't know what the battery cost to replace some of these are for trucks yet. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you today. Any question, feel free to